Hey everybody, welcome back. I was thinking of doing a solo broadcast today, solo podcast. I haven't done that in about a year. I've usually relegated the podcast stuff to guests discussions to try and bring interesting voices into the fold and to get my stuff out there to new audiences. So that's why I haven't really done podcasts and recordings on my own since then. But some things I think like stories, for example, they lend themselves to the format. So for today, I have a story that I want to share with you, and it's about my family, and it's about my grandparents. So my grandparents are communists, and before you get all upset about that, they're not they're not what you would sort of think in the West a communist is. And there's this strange disconnect, divide between what Americans have been taught communism looked like, especially in the late USSR, and what it actually was like, what it was felt like, what it was lived like by the people themselves living in the USSR. And so, in a weird way, they're just it's again like all propaganda. It's just made to obfuscate the issue and to hide the truth. And so, I'll tell you the story about when I was visiting my grandparents. So we got to talking. Then another thing that is worth mentioning is that in the Slav lands, people like to talk about politics. Even within the family, they'll argue about this stuff. And I think it's a very low and a very bad trait. But I used to think that Americans were crazy for never talking about politics. They'd, the whole meme or the whole stereotype that Americans will talk about anything except politics. They want to talk about sports. They'll talk about, what's that Dave Chappelle skit like? Dave, do not ask me who I vote for. I was busy telling you a story about how I was having sex with my wife. So anyway, you know what I mean? Like they'll talk about anything except politics. And I think I definitely noticed that. And the moment that they started talking about politics, when they started bringing up politics at the Thanksgiving dinner, was with this SJW crap, which has destroyed families, put extreme strain on friendships and everything. Basically, the people who have this streak, they're the NPCs in our lives, and there's nothing you can do about it. We live in a mixed society. We don't segregate along soul types or cognitive whatever. So you're going to have NPCs, and NPCs uncritically follow and repeat the mainstream dictums and narratives, and so this is like a wedge point. These people are walking bio bombs that are basically women, and they're used to be inserted into the family life. Like, so anyway, the point is that politics in general, keeping it out of the kitchen, keeping it out of the family, out of the friendships, out of basically polite society, in retrospect is actually the correct thing, because the alternative is basically the regime creates talking points in media and propaganda, and then once the taboo has been broken, their NPC agents force these topics at dinner and whatever, and they basically destroy any social dynamics. People are very alienated from each other now. People can't trust one another. People don't talk to one another. I mean, living in a city in America, it's like literally behind enemy lines. It's hostile territory. It's a very alienating experience. And so partially the problem is that around 2012, people started talking about politics, and most people should stay far, far away from that. That's like one of the key tenets of the blog, is that the peasants should be left alone. The peasants should stay out of politics. That's why democracy and other forms of representative government are so evil, because they recruit the peasant masses into what are inter-oligarchic squabbles. And they try to do this by telling us that it's actually about great moral principles and not just about who gets what share of the pie. And so we end up tearing each other to pieces and destroying the one thing that we have as a defense mechanism against the predation of our political betters, and that's our peasant solidarity, our ability to close ranks, our numbers, and the fact that we don't behave like hyenas to one another. But more and more, we do behave terrible to each other. And so the problem is that there either can't be any solidarity among the oppressed or the citizenry against the oligarchy, because of these toxic ideologies that have been injected into the bloodstream of the body of the people. So we cannot to have a concerted rebellion of any kind, social, political, or kinetic. You need to have a concert. You need to be able to relate to people, to trust one another, to have these traditions of cooperation, an ability to self-organize. America used to be defined by this. Solzhenitsyn talks about how the first thing the Bolsheviks did was they banned all gatherings pretty much of more than 5 people that weren't officially allowed by the party, which is why there's no civil society in Russia to this day. And that's a liberal talking point. They're like, oh, there's no civil, that's why we can't have nice things. It's because there's no civil society. And say, yeah, okay. Some things the liberals say are true simply because, water is wet. So yeah, Putin and his gang are criminals. And yes, they've stolen billions. Yes, it's an incredibly corrupt system. Yeah, you could spend a lot of time detailing the corruption. Sure. It doesn't, obviously people only view things through signal rhetoric, only through that kind of lens, in the sense that, certain talking points are pre-approved for certain sides, right? For certain people with certain views. So Group A is allowed to say things, like a certain list of things. You've got a word bank that you can withdraw from. And if you sort of add something to add a new word, add a new phrase, add a new idea to it, you will be chewed out for it. This is really relevant to the original story I wanted to tell. I kind of took a long tangent to get to the crux of it. So my grandparents are communists, right? And my grandma hates Russia because she's more involved with the media. She watches more media, and so basically some astrologist told her that that Putin was like the Antichrist or something like that, and but she's a communist, and my grandpa is pro-Russia and also a communist. Now neither of them know anything. No, they know nothing about what communism is, and we had the whole thing. I realized that when we were talking about, I think it was around Easter time, and I mentioned that there was Christianity wasn't really allowed in the Soviet Union, and this shocked them. They fought back on me, and they were like, "What are you talking about? That's just not true." And I was like, "Okay, well maybe on a lower level. Among families it was allowed, but on an official level, obviously it was an atheist regime. Communism is about atheism. It promoted atheism. That's the official line." And they were like, they seriously acted like they'd never heard of it before. And the funny thing is that, liberals, they'll portray the past as a mix of everything they dislike. So, they'll also pretend that the past was Christian, like the Soviet Union was this Christian fascistic empire, right? Which sounds pretty cool, right? But no, it was nothing like that. And so my grandparents, what's their excuse? Well, I even brought up the example of Gagarin when he was flying around in the stratosphere and in his Sputnik, right? And he said, I don't know if he actually said it, but the quote was that, "Oh, I was up in the heavens and I didn't see God." And they made these Soviet-style propaganda posters where he's floating around in space and he's looking for God and he says, "I can't find God." And you can Google this right now. It's pretty. I learned about this in college. So when I was learning about how bad Russia and the Soviet Union was in my classes, they were talking about how there's this element, there's this, they were pushing this atheism. And I think everybody in the West understands that communism is about atheism. That's why they call them the godless, atheistic communists. They're communists, like this kind of evangelical pastor thumping on his Bible type thing. So that was my impression of it. I don't know, actually. They weren't Christian in the Soviet Union, so I know they're kind of making that up. But the churches are still standing, most of them. Maybe not most, I don't know. There used to be a lot more churches. There are some elements, I guess, of Christianity that were allowed because of Stalin. But under Khrushchev, they really ratcheted down on it again. So the point is that I asked, then the conversation continued, and we started talking about what is communism, because I was like, you don't think communism is about atheism? Okay. Both of them had gotten like Marxist diplomas or whatever, or like the, you have to write these theses about about Marxism, Leninism. It's like my parents had to do it. Pretty much everyone who studied had to do that. You had to sort of, it's like your college thesis now. So they both did that. They both were educated in the system. They both seem to be very pro-communist. So obviously they must know what it's about, right? No, of course not. I asked them, do you know anything about communism at all? Like, what are the key tenets? Tell me about the proletariat, dictatorship of the proletariat. They'd never heard of it. Well, my grandpa did, but my grandma had never heard of it. She'd never heard of the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is a woman who who was raised and lived and employed in this system, and she wasn't an outlier. She wasn't like a rebel in society. She's very, she follows the letter and the spirit of the law to a T. How does she not know about the dictatorship of the proletariat? You go down the list, and do you know anything about the revolution? Do you know anything about Trotsky? They don't know anything about Trotsky. Again, my grandpa, he's a Stalinist, so he knows a little bit more about all this stuff. But still, what's Trotskyism? They don't know. Do you know about the Mensheviks? Nothing. Isn't this like the core foundational information of like that underpins? And this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, because I mean, what an average American doesn't know anything about the founding fathers, right? They don't know anything about the Constitution. And Americans are actually considered more civically minded than the average person. So because they actually believe in this whole citizen scholar, citizen constitutional scholar ethos. So in general, a lot of Americans do know about the Constitution. They know very little, even if they think they do, and that what they know is very wrong and it's bad. Like, it's actually more malicious than helpful. But it's basically, I would say it's the gold standard. And in the Soviet Union, it was the same effort. They were really trying to get people into the whole system. They were really trying to, it's not like they were trying to deny people access to history. Like they were drilling into people the history of like the party and all this sort of thing. Like, in contrast, my dad, who's a historian, he knows his stuff. I mean, he knows all about he hates it. Like, he can't stand it. He's like, if I hear about that anymore, it'll make my head burst. He got his fill of it, but he knows it, right? So, and he was educated later. So the point of the matter is that I finally got around to asking them, so what is communism to you? If it's not about the dictatorship of the proletariat, it's not about atheism, it's not about, go down the list of all the things, what is it to you? And the answer is, it's about clean roads, clean streets. It's about employment, everyone having jobs, factories working. It's about knowing your neighbors, about camaraderie, sort of, being able to say hello when you go outside of the apartment. So it's about having crime-free streets. It's about nice ice cream, Soviet-style ice cream, that sort of thing. It's about only having everyone being on the same page, because there was 3 channels or something. So everybody was on the same page about stuff. So that's what they define communism as. It's this, and that's what, in a weird way, communism did become that, in the sense that all that other stuff about it was kind of forgotten, or obviously it existed on the political level. Obviously that was the official rhetoric. Obviously they never officially forgot about the mission, to the socialist international mission and the workers of the world uniting or whatever. And you actually, if you do dig a little bit deeper in old timers' heads, they will spout some old Soviet era propaganda about friendship between nations and working together to overcome the capitalist oppressors. They don't know what any of it means, but it's sort of like you can trigger it. It's a Pavlovian response, just like Americans will reflexively blurt freedom and French fries, right? Something like that. And we've established that communism is about basically social cohesion and orderliness in society and the nostalgia of one's youth. So, the greater point I'm making here is that communism actually got Russified, and that's probably why it was detonated in the end. Basically, Russia has a very strong digestion system. They can take foreign ideologies and they can sort of process them, and they can digest them. They can sort of assimilate them by Russifying them to a certain extent. I think the better metaphor is, of course, like a wound. Russian culture is able to scab over the wound, over the scar, and so that's what So the crazy thing is that the traditionalists, or the people who are considered conservative in Russian society, are now the pro-communists, in the sense that it's conservatism is a relative position. So if 20 years ago you had, so what will happen right now? Let's put it this way: so the SJWs will win, and they'll force through child tranny education everywhere and mandatory they'll put the kids on the horn. They'll do a lot of crazy stuff in the coming years, right? And that'll become the conservative position 20 years from now. So if in the next 2 years we adopt all these crazy reforms, about one generation from now, these crazy reforms that would be just totally unthinkable to us now, that will be the new conservative position. It's a relative position. It just means whatever was established beforehand, we want to stick to that. It's basically people who like how things were in their youth, people who are attracted to the way things were when they were young. So that's pretty much the only thing that conservatism can be defined by. And obviously older people, that's why they tend towards being more conservative, because everyone prefers their youth, and that's seems to be the only real thing that, and past a certain point, you're just not willing to change personally your own habits, your employment skills, if you have any, whatever. You're just not on that level where you're engaged with things anymore. So if that's the case, then you're obviously trying to slow things down, and you want to keep things as they were, in some level of stasis, to slow progress in air quotes, right? So, okay, and another corollary to that is that if you had a rough childhood, or if the times were rough when you were growing up as a kid, it was not a good time, chances are you won't be a conservative as you grow up. Conservatism is almost always defined by a prerequisite, I suppose, is just having something to be nostalgic, to look back fondly on. So I think that's probably why conservatism, I think, will have a hard time going forward in the West, because people are not, I guess people can remember the 80s fondly, but other than that, people are just, or maybe the 90s, people are just not going to be able to get on board the whole, let's go back to 2003. That was a great, we had it all figured out in 2003. No, that's not going to happen. So they don't know what communism is. They don't really care. They will defend communism, though, which is interesting. And it's all about, obviously, signal rhetoric. It's all about just indicating that you're for the things, for old things. You're pro-old. You're like, you're against change. That's what it is. In America, you have the same dynamic with, say, Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is, of course, he recently came out and he said that something has to be done about the, I think his direct words was, he just pointed out that the Jewish money and Jewish political power was directed at white people, and that they were funding anti-white hatred, and that he had enough because they were targeting his children. This was in his interview with Candace Owens, with the base black MAGA lady. And so he said, that's kind of a big deal, actually. It's what, Tucker's kind of pushing the line here to even say stuff like, pro or anti-white, to say that, the left is anti-white. These talking points were not around in 2016, 17. They had to be pushed really, really hard from both sides, from both activists on the right, who have been trying to push basically the term anti-white or pro-white for the last 2-3 decades now, at least 2 decades. Let's just say that. And then from the other side, the left, with their extremism, also increases, sheds light on the issue. So Tucker took it the next step by pointing out the Jewish role in all this. All of this is, of course, funded by Jewish power. It's the Jews who are behind the anti-white agenda, and they have been for the last century and some. So the key point with Tucker, though, is that he hides behind, or he bases his argument on racial communism. That is, he will quote Martin Luther King, and he will talk about how we have to have radical racial equality in America. This is a fundamentally, again, it's racial communism. It's an extremely radical idea, and it was pushed onto America in the 60s and the 70s by the elite, who forced at the point of a gun. They sent their activists in. They disrupted they destroyed working class neighborhoods with their desegregation. They inflicted these biohazards on people, and they did it with the clear intention of destroying just the American consciousness, I suppose, the American identity. They sent them in, and Martin Luther King was an actual communist subversive. His speeches were being written for him by Marxists, by Jews, Marxist Jews who told him what to say, and he just said it. He was like an Obama from of his time. He himself was, of course, he was a loathsome individual. He was a pastor and a pimp, and he was into apparently abusing white prostitutes. So all of this, the whole racial agenda, it is based on domination. There's no such thing as equality. It's about getting even with whitey, right? It's about resentment and jealousy and feelings of inferiority and that sort of thing. But that's not my bread and butter. That's not what I try to talk about on the blog. The point is that it's strange that Tucker Carlson is now using the MLK standard to say, we gotta stand up in the name of Martin Luther King and his vision against the racism of the new left. And it's exactly the same thing where the Soviet Union, right, where the conservatives are the people who are for communism, and in America they're for Trotskyism. This is now the traditional position of the natural conservative. Yesteryear's left-wing terrorists are this year's right-wing conservative folk heroes. It's you see it happening over and over again everywhere. So in terms of assimilation, though, a lot of these, back to Russia, a lot of these ideas, like, for example, Christianity or communism, they did end up taking on a Russian character. And one of the reasons for this is just simply because the original revolutionary cadres, so the original Christian Bolsheviks, for example, or the original communists, they ended up being diluted. They ended up being either intermixing or being eventually just replaced. As they end up fleshing out this whole apparatus of state, they have to end up hiring Russians, right? So bit by bit, the machinery of the state ends up being Russified. Also, they just have a natural aversion towards the military. So the military ended up being this bastion of Russians, and Russians like to fight. It's a very Indo-European characteristic. It's this being good at war, having discipline, having bravery. No other group of people has this in the same extent as such a core component of the culture. So, with other people, there was this Orwell story of when I think he's in Burma or Bangladesh, and the soldiers that he was assigned to, they retreated from the enemy. They were local mercenaries. And when they were asked why they did this, they said, we were afraid. And they just didn't have this concept in their head of overcoming, of, you could be feeling afraid, but you should be brave and overcome that. They couldn't figure that out. They don't have this concept. And I've met a lot of people from all over the world, and it's funny, a lot of them try to be like us, right? They try to be like, I was about to say normal people, but they try to be like Russians or whites in general, right? Or Americans. And what's funny is that even if they consciously try to make that effort, a lot of them, these innate characteristics start coming out, like extreme fearfulness, lack of discipline, inability to show up somewhere on time. These things, they start coming out and they can't help themselves. It's almost like there's something to this innate thing. So any system that the British or whoever, these colonists, would impose on their colonies would end up being somewhat taking on the characteristics of the colony, of the people who are being colonized. And so you'd end up having this, you have these principles, you have these standards, you have these things you're trying to impose on the people that you've colonized, but the natural tendencies are just so, they wear and they tear at even the best laid foundational plans. That's why utopia is so hard to achieve, thankfully. That's why the agenda of the social engineers is so hard to reach. It's just the simple human resistance, wear and tear. It's the local cultures manifesting themselves in inefficiencies in the system. So that is an interesting point that is worth understanding in the context of Russia. So take Russian Orthodoxy. It's the most, out of the mainstream Christian denominations, it's obviously the most pagan, the most not Christian, in the sense that, like, not Nicene. It's the only branch of Christianity with an official mystical branch, the hesychasts, who are, of course, they're theologically justified as existing, but you can theologically justify anything. Having peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, you can theologically justify anything at all. I mean, you have a lot of material to work with in the Bible, let's just put it that way. So as long as you put a metaphor there, swap out the meaning of a word here, you can do anything. That's the job of the priests, is to figure out ways to justify their continued rule and the advancement of their agenda through rhetorical and legalistic tricks. That's the whole idea of their faith. That's what theology is. It's just lawyering. And with enough money, you can buy the best lawyer in town, and you can basically get away with murder. We all know that. It's the same with theology. And so Russian Orthodoxy is the most Russified. It's the most Europeanized. It's the most, I guess you could say, Hyperboreanized version of Christianity. Most Russians, and I had this discussion in my chat the other day, I speak a lot with Russian Orthodox, and I always attack them, I belittle them, I insult their God and their beliefs and their traditions. I really, really just dig it in there. I call them the worst names possible, because I really despise, like, in general, within the population, I would never, like, pick a fight with, I would never publicly go against it. But if you're going to be in my circle of, like, people I share things with, make content with, if you're going to be in the inner circle, no mercy. Like, that's basically, if you're a stalker, no mercy. Like, you get the full thing. If I can't be honest with the inner circle, then, obviously I'm polite with people I don't know, or just with people who are not that involved in this sort of thing, who don't fancy themselves as thinkers or people who give a shit. So with them, yeah, by all means, I would never bring any of this up. But if you're in for the whole thing. And while I'm demeaning and belittling and basically just being a total asshole to them to try and get them to figure out just how misguided they are, I'm always struck by the fact that their defense is that, look, you're arguing against a phantom. We don't do Christianity like in the West. We don't know what the Bible is. None of us have read the Bible. So I'm in a group of 50 people, and in that group of 50 people, most of them are Orthodox, and the ones that have read the Bible, two, me and the other guy. And like, the lack of knowledge that the average Christian has in Russia is so shocking. Like, they could not tell you any of the major personalities even in the Bible. Like, it's one thing to not have read the Bible because, it's poorly written, it's boring. I mean, unless you, like, really dig into it and and you got, like, this conspiratorial approach to it, then it becomes interesting, right? But otherwise, it's just a total, it's long. So, yeah, okay, but do they know any of the main personalities? Do they know, who Aaron is, for example? No, they don't. Do they know who Moses is? That's kind of, it's up in the air. Some of them know, but a lot of them don't understand the details of it. Just basic stuff. They can't. Then when we get to the actual Christian creed, like, to be a Christian, you have to be able to recite the Nicene Creed. Nicene Credo or whatever. So you have to articulate the tenets of the faith. You have to be able to say that you believe in the Trinity and that Jesus was corporeal and God at the same time. I don't know how they justify that. You just got to have faith, son. But yeah, you have to outline the results of this gathering of bishops where they basically declared the early Christians to be heretics, and they shoved the Old Testament into this new Bible they were creating, which they then edited heavily in the coming years as well. But whatever, that's the whole story. So anyway, that's the thing. It's a corporate statement. You have to be up to date on the corporate policies. None of them know the Nicene Creed. In fact, a lot of them seem offended that I think I insisted that they had to know it to actually consider themselves a Christian. They don't believe that, they don't understand anything. Like, they don't understand, for example, what is the role of the apostles? Or, now whatever, I could go down the list of all the things they don't understand. They don't understand that the God is named Yahweh. They think that Jesus was Russian. They think that events written in the Bible are about events that happen in Russia. Now, this sounds crazy, but it actually makes sense because the actual oral sort of народное, like the folk tradition, most of it is like 90% based around the traditions of the saints. So basically, every single day of the calendar has a saint, and you're just supposed to like pray to that saint and do some little ritual, like sprinkle salt on your stairs or do a somersault or do 5 jumping jacks or something. Like every day you got like a little thing that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to think about that saint on his day. And on certain days you're supposed to eat something else. And so the whole tradition of it is basically a story of martyrs or saints. So they will, when they read their books or when they talk about it, what they're talking about as well. There was this one dude who like healed a village, or there was this one dude who was told that he had to abandon Christianity, but he refused, and then they martyred him. So that's the whole tradition for the most part. It's basically like, it's very pagan. It's Russians or people around Russia who are these saints who have lived these, I wouldn't call it heroic because Christianity is anti-heroic by nature, but I guess faithful lives or moral lives. They were somehow examples of piety, and they either died for it or most of them died for it. And so what you do in Christianity is you sort of, in Russian Orthodox tradition, is you just talk about them, you read books about them, you go to a church with an icon of them. It's very heavily relic based. So these relics have like magic powers that, like, if you kiss it or touch it, like someone's bone or like someone's foreskin or something. All right, I exaggerate. That's the Catholics. They worship the holy foreskin of Jesus Christ. You know about that? The holy precipice? It's pretty funny. But anyway, they claimed that they had found the foreskin of Jesus Christ and that it had magical powers. But whatever, so I don't know if they have I don't think they claim to have the foreskin of Christ in Orthodoxy. It'd be funny if they did, though. But that's it, that's Orthodoxy. And that's not obviously what it was intended to be. I mean, if you actually read the Bible, you understand that it's Bolshevism, right? It's about I'm about to write an article going deep into all of this, but it is basically communism in the sense that it's about communes, it's about doing away with wealth. It's about living I guess you could call it a hippie lifestyle, but that's kind of insulting to hippies because what they had made a lot more sense. It's basically becoming a fanatic. It's about, Jesus says you should abandon your family, right? And then if you actually add the Old Testament to it, it's quite clear that the mission that Christianity then fulfills is to destroy the pagan world, right? And again, most Christians would agree with this, as long as the connotation is good, right? So if I say you destroyed the pagan world, they'll say, how dare you, sir? But if amongst themselves someone says, we destroyed the pagan world, they'll be like, hell yeah, and we'll do it again. So, but the mission that you see in Psalms and the prophets, just in the general declarations of Deuteronomy, of Yahweh, the entire thrust, the whole point of the story is to conquer the world, and to conquer the world in the name of the Jews and the name of the Jewish God. And to do that, they have to destroy all the idols. And what are idols? Is it local gods? Yes. Is it local traditions? Also yes. Local culture? Yes. Anything can be considered an idol. A marriage tradition that differs, that's not listed in the Bible. Dietary traditions also on the chopping block. Everything goes. It's a fire sale, right? And that's what Protestantism was. You see, you couldn't do this hard-edged Judaism like in the Old Testament in the beginning, because you had natural pagan resistance, natural nationalist, autonomous, localized, anti-global communities. I'm using some hippie language here. So you had to figure out a way to be able to do that, and so they created, the religion was assimilated, basically. It became a much more diluted version of itself. It mixed with the local cultures. And in Russian Orthodoxy especially, it really comes out, like the real Russian element of it comes out, which is why people mistakenly think, and I mean, I listen, again, I'm very, I think, tolerant of this viewpoint, the viewpoint of dumb people. So yes, there is an element of communism that was Russified. Why? Again, simply because a lot of the communists ended up being Russians who rose up through the ranks, because the military ended up being communist. Because Israel was founded, and so the top communists decided that they weren't really interested in the Soviet project as much anymore, and they focused their energy on Israel instead. Because America opened its arms to the Trotskyites, and they became the most successful faction. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but eventually, yeah, it became more Russified, and basically this sort of communitarian peasant tradition of helping each other out, working together, camaraderie-ness, peasant solidarity, that became associated with communism. And so all the stuff that, my grandparents like about it is stuff that predates communism, that was then, that sort of imbued itself into communism, that sort of started working to make it palatable, to make it workable. So it's basically, what they like is the sort of the immune system response, or better yet, the assimilation, the digestive response. And it's the same with Christianity. Why do nationalists and patriots like Christianity? Russians, I mean. Well, because it's got these Russian heroes. You can pray to Alexander Nevsky, who's this prince from Novgorod that defeated the, the Teutonic Order, right? There's a bunch of these heroes. There's heroes from the Chechen campaigns. The Chechens were inhuman, and they just, they were very brutal, and they tortured women, children, everybody, committed a lot of war crimes. And there's these stories of, I think, 2 young men who refused to convert to Islam, and they were brutally tortured to death, and they became martyrs. So this is the kind of orthodoxy that we're talking about, this war church that they built. I mean, they wanted to fill it with communist symbols, with actual hammers and sickles and Stalin and everybody like that. I mean, it's absurd. These things, you think that they're totally against one another, right? That communism was created to destroy Russia and to destroy Orthodoxy and so on. But this strange assimilatory process continues. And I've been very critical of it because it is incoherent. But there is a higher logic, I suppose, or a lower logic at work here, which is just survival, right? I mean, you're always a captive of whatever society you're a part of, right? So on some level, you're in a prison cell. You may as well spruce the place up a bit if you can. Put up some posters, get a ficus, and do what you can, right? And so you start exerting your own influence. And because your influence innately, it's just, I mean, most white people of all cultures, Germans, Americans, whatever, Australians, they really don't think that they have any culture. They've been taught to believe this, right? And they associate themselves with modernity, which is why a lot of people don't like, white culture. It's because when you think white culture, you think sitting in an office under an intense AC barrage, just clicking away at data sheets and spreadsheets, right? No one likes that. And then there's this whole idea of like the noble savage of, Avatar or Dances with Wolves or whatever, Pocahontas, that these people were just chilling, having an authentic, connected life before Whitey showed up and forced them into offices and strip malls. That's basically what a lot of people think. Maybe they can't explain it that way, but that is what's going on. Now, so the thing about what we have going on with the assimilation is or the digestion or the natural character of a people shows itself. It's like it's like a plant, you know, that you, no matter what you do, the plant will always try to find a way to grow up. But you can make it difficult for it. You know, you can pour concrete over it. You can and just about everything except killing it, right? You can do all these different things, but the plant will always try to grow up, and so it'll start growing up in twisted, strange shapes, and it looks like an art form or whatever. It looks like very weird, and that ends up being a culture. It's basic culture, you could say, is a nation or a people's character manifesting itself despite all the different problems or the resistance or whatever that they've encountered over the years, right? So anyway, with the assimilation thing, so with Russian Orthodoxy, they took what essentially was an earlier version of communism, theological communism, that was vehemently anti-Russian, anti-European, created specifically as a weapon to enslave us by the nation of priests, following the Platonic agenda. I'm writing an article explaining all the details of that agenda, a part 2. But again, it became more Russified because like what you would call paganism, I suppose. I call it just nationalism. Paganism and nationalism are synonyms. They have to be. So it's whatever is innate to the character of the people. But even this concept that you might have these innate characteristics as a person, as a culture, and that they will show themselves even under an occupation regime, and that they might color that regime and create this synthesis. The stuff I'm saying, it seems so simple, but it's so over the head of literally every single person I've ever met in real life who's not on the internet, who doesn't know how to use the internet, basically. They can't fathom it. And so if you say, okay, well, look, the previous synthesis was a survival mechanism. What we made out of communism was a testament to us, the fact that we could, despite all of this, still create a semi-functional society, despite the fact that, you know, pretty much money was banned. You know, like all these crazy Spartan reforms were forced on us by a hostile foreign elite, and yet we still kind of managed to make it work. That's a testament to our survival and skills and our digestive cultural response and the strength of the Russian character, that it could break through the bonds and the shackles that it was put on and start working its way into the system. The same thing with Christianity. We made the most Russian version of this, this virulently Semitic, anti-Russian religion. We did our best, and we did a really good job with it. And so that's sort of like this idea that is very hard for people to understand. And with the Tucker thing, right, in America, to hone it in, now the conservative is supposed to defend Martin Luther King, the key tenets of Martin Luther King. Of course, 20 years prior to Martin Luther King, when the beaches of Normandy were being stormed, they asked the soldiers, and would you support desegregation? 90-some% of them said no, they were against desegregation. And, there's a lot of interesting surveys that were done at the time, and basically the people who stormed the beaches of Normandy were what nowadays we would consider, very hardcore extremist radicals. Of course, the system, the agenda, it has to pretend that this isn't the case. These men are heroes, in air quotes, for doing what they did. But if we actually examine their beliefs or why they thought they were doing what they were doing, these people are actually, very extreme. Let's just put it that way. They're like me, So how do we square this? Well, what do we do about it? So Tucker's going to be going out there, and I'm very glad that he did point out the fact that it's Jews who are creating this anti-white propaganda. But he's also promoting racial communism. He's promoting Martin Luther King. He's promoting stuff that even in the 90s was not, his whole gay is okay thing. That's kind of strange. He acts like it's a settled question. He says, well, most men don't care about homosexuals. That's not true. That's not true at all. I mean, most men are repulsed by it. But he says it so matter-of-factly, like Obama wasn't able to speak so frankly or so openly about it when he was running for president. How is it possible then that the conservative guy is now saying that it's... So you have this problem, basically. That's what I'm saying. And every time you try to address the problems, what people will do is they can't think independently. They can't just analyze the problem independent of itself, right? So here's a problem A, let's provide solution B. What they will do, the parameters of the debate is, should we do what we were doing 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or should we try this new thing, which is building on what we were doing 10 or 20 years ago? That's progressivism and that's conservatism. That's the main debate within society, right? The only acceptable parameters of debate are, should we keep things they were, depending on the society, 10 years ago? Because in America, that's pretty much it. Where the conservatives are saying, let's keep things the way they are from like 2012. That was okay. They won't go further back than that, right? No one's going to say, let's go back to the 1990s or 1980s and our views on things. Let's go back to the 1970s. Let's go back to the 1950s. Let's go back to the 1940s. These people were heroes, right? The greatest generation. Why can't we have their values and their worldview? Well, it's obviously because you go to jail for having or saying some of the stuff that was common back then, right? So depending on the society, that's that's as far, depending on the society, a society, different countries will allow you to have different, intervals of time that you can be conservative in, right? So in America, it's a very progressive society. So you only have about 10, 15 years of looking back that you can say, let's be the way things were 15 years ago, right? And there is no other principle at stake. There are no principles at all at stake. It's all just relative. So in the Soviet Union, or in Russia, it's all about, should we be like the Soviet Union that the people who are still alive now remember? So the Soviet Union basically of the 1980s. Should we go back to the Soviet Union of the 1980s? Or should we not? That was the debate that was had forever. That's the only, you couldn't ever discuss the principles. Nobody knows the principles. Nobody knows, are we discussing atheism or not atheism, right? Are we discussing honor-based culture versus non? Are we discussing the merits of military? Nothing is actually being discussed. It's a prepackaged product. You're either for the past, the recent past, or you're for the present and the next stage of the revolution. So all conservatives are yesteryear's revolutionaries, and that's why they always lose, because the whole plan, the whole project had stages. It's like a rocket being sent off into the stratosphere. It has to shed components that got it up the first leg, the first hurdle. It drops the fuel tanks or whatever, the additional rockets, and then it continues on its journey. That's what they are. They're jettisoned. They're debris. They're left behind by the social engineers. They fulfilled their role. You Christians, you fulfilled your role. You did a lot to destroy the local culture, destroy authentic spiritual practice, to basically create a situation where our theological betters, our older brothers in the faith, you handed them a monopoly on banking. You gave them basically all the tools they needed to do what they did next. So that's on you. I mean, not on you, obviously, on your ideological forebears. But that mission was finished, which is why they got rid of it. They don't need it anymore. And so when then they moved on to communism, and then communism, in contrast, in comparison to what they're pushing now in Russia or in America, trust me, you would prefer to live under communism in Russia now in America. So in 2023 America, if there was a magical experiment or whatever, or some virtual reality experiment where you could try out life in the Soviet Union of basically the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, every American would probably take that opportunity. As long as you didn't attach the whole communism label to it, they'd be like, okay, this is way better than what we have now. The products are much better quality. People are much healthier. They're much better dressed. People have friends. People are more social. There's this camaraderie-ness. Things are safer. There's so many benefits it's so much better in comparison. But obviously you and I know that communism was this destructive, revolutionary, inherently, I would say, one of the most fundamentally evil things ever inflicted upon humanity. But in comparison to what we got going on now, you could make a conservative argument for being that. So anyway, I've given a lot of examples about what I'm talking about. And the general thrust of the argument is we have to be able to think differently. We can't think about conservative versus progressive. We have to be able to think in terms of overarching agendas. Why was it that the Platonists decided to force us to worship the demiurge? Well, why? Well, my argument is quite simple. If you have an omnipotent, all-good, all-powerful God, then the power situation on earth is explained as being just and good by default. Because, well, he's in charge. A good God who has all the power is in charge. Therefore, the people who are in charge, who have the most money, the most political power, are approved by God. And if temporarily they're not, like you have to get rid of one of them or the other because something came up and you've got a better candidate, well, then you say that actually it's all part of the greater plan, this greater good plan, and this is just like a way to affect more, like basically you can create a lot of justification for people maintaining power. That's just one of the things, one of the key things that was reformed. And the reformers, as you'll notice, they didn't start with economic reforms, they didn't start with communism or all this. They began with the basics, the fundamental building block of everything from which everything else flows, which is totally discredited in the West. Nobody takes it seriously anymore. Metaphysics. They started with metaphysics because that's the foundation for how you view anything and everything. It's what you think about God and the nature of the universe. Is everything supposed to be good, and everything that strikes you as not good is just you being a Debbie Downer, a negative Nancy or something? Because a lot of people think like that. They think that everybody is inherently good, all things are inherently good, and if you don't think that way, it's because you've got a personal failing that doesn't allow you to see the good in things. Now, there's something to be said about having a positive attitude, of course, but you can see how this is a very powerful system of control. That's why New Age, partially, as I've discussed before with my guests, is a system of control promoted by the elites. It's all about just pretending that there's no such thing as evil, right? So you can see that there's an agenda, and the agenda is always, in broad strokes, to justify the agenda of the social engineers who are trying to create a society in which they have maximum leverage over power, that there's a maximum minimum amount of elites, so that they need less and less people as to affect control, right? So with technology, one guy who's at like a command desk or something can have the ability to surveil millions and to deploy drones on millions. You know, like that's the goal. They want to be able to concentrate as much power in the hands of as few people as possible. That is it's like the logos of the world. That's the teleos of the world. Things tend towards that. It's like, contrary to what libertarians say, markets tend towards monopoly, right? Unless there's a difference between classical liberalism and libertarianism, right? In the sense that the classical understood that you need a leviathan, you need overarching government to basically prevent monopolies from forming, because one company or one corporation will gain an initial edge, either first starter advantage, or they'll innovate a little bit better or whatever. They'll just gain some sort of advantage, and these things compound, they build on each other. And over time, this leads to monopolies, consolidation of power in economics. But the same thing occurs in politics. You do see this thing where where you see that power tends to concentrate. Obviously, in history, there have been great moments where it diffuses. There are black swan events. That's part of the thing. But they, with each, it's like Neo in the Matrix. There's these anomalies, remainder sums that they're trying to account for, trying to get rid of. So power tends to concentrate, tends to monopolize, just like economic might does. And again, it's libertarians will tell you this is not true, even though you can open your eyes around you and you can say, well, there's a lot less companies now with a lot more market share now than there were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But whatever, it doesn't jibe with their theories, so they just sort of pretend that that's not occurring. Now, the important, or they all just blame it on the government. The important thing to understand, though, is that you have with the agenda as it advances, they will always come up with new sheaths for it, new coloring, a new coat of paint or whatever to justify what they're going for. So in fact, sometimes these ideologies seem like they're at odds with one another, like libertarianism and communism, but they're not really. The goal is to create a global government of a synarchy. Synarchies don't necessarily have to really even be all that religious. It could be secular synarchy. But the thing is that most things that we don't understand can be understood as magic. Like if they have access to better technology than we do, better psychological techniques. For example, the CIA apparently, this is some conspiracy theory, I don't know if it's true, had this ability to create phantom thoughts in people's head. Like a phantom voice could be projected and people could be made to believe it was an angel or God or something speaking to them. You know, that level of manipulation, it's basically magic at that point, right? Anyway, the point is that you know what the agenda is, and then over time it morphs, it changes to adapt to new circumstances, new neighbors, new economic realities, new climate realities, new political realities, new technological realities. But the only real way to assess something is to understand the agenda of your enemies and to then assess whether or not, you know, proposal A or ideology B or action C furthers their agenda or takes away from their agenda. So anything that encourages the distribution of power away from these concentrated figures, from these oligarchic circles, is a win, right? It doesn't matter how it's done or what the ideology for it is, or what God in the name of which it's being done. As long as power is being taken from the synarchy and being reinvested in the hands of people, it's good. So, for example, you could say diesel engines. You know, it's a funny one, but technology is a good example. Some technology is bad, obviously. I don't take the view that all technology is bad, but a large part of it is specifically created exactly because its goal is to further concentrate power in the hands of the elite. Economic, political, coercive, informational, whatever. However, there are also technologies that have a democratizing effect in the positive sense, that they make you more powerful. They enable you to have more autonomy. And not just in the libertarian sense of you being an island, a hostile island, you know, sitting on your own and on some like bunker in the middle of nowhere, but communities or, you know, groups. Could you and your group of people use this technology, use this ideology, use this social reform, political reform, economic reform to be able to attain more internal cohesion, cooperation, and also take away the coercive power of the synarchy? That is basically the only way to evaluate things, the only real thing that makes any sense if you're evaluating things politically or so on. A lot of people are drawn to libertarianism because it seems to promote individual rights and sort of it's a response to, I guess, this sort of globalist centralized tyranny. However, this is total nonsense because what libertarianism does is it takes away all the conceptual tools that you have to be able to mount an effective resistance. So you could say, for example, to someone, you go up to someone in the street and say, look, I'm going to help you stand up to your bully. To some kid in high school, you say, I'm going to help you stand up to your bully. Here's what we're going to do. I'm totally on your side. I respect your right to stand up to this bully. You have a baseball bat, let me take that away from you. You have a knife, let me take that knife. You have whatever, like you take away all the weapons from the kid while telling him, I'm rooting for you, go for it, do it. It's basically libertarianism strips us of all the natural weapons that we as humans have. So for a human, our claws or our hide or our sharp fangs, it's the organizations that we can build around us. So you have to be able to self-organize. And to be able to self-organize, you need things that promote cohesion. And the things that promote cohesion are race, it's blood. Blood is the most important thing. It's a religious type thinking, that is shared beliefs, right? Shared beliefs, blood, that sort of thing. All the things that apparently take away from an individual that libertarianism thinks is bad, right? But the thing is that these things are as natural to a human as a hide is to a boar or tusks are to a boar. There are weapons in our defense. We need to have a tribe of like-minded, like-blooded people around us to be able to resist. Synarchy works anytime that you see it. It's basically about destroying local communities, destroying blood relations among people, because these things are an alternative source of authority and power. So You just go down the list. A lot of white people nowadays, hippies. That's why I like hippies, actually, partially. They do things that they try to get out of the paradigm, the globalist control grid. Like, for example, they'll make communes. They'll try to make their own food. They'll grow their own vegetables. But that's pretty much it. Like their whole conceptual framework is very limited. They believe in all the other stuff. They will actively do things that make themselves weaker, like veganism, for example, like letting in people that are not part of your group into your group, like agitating for increased migration, not being able to draw the lines between enemy and friend, believing in new age type philosophy where you don't believe in evil, for example. There's a lot of promoting equality between men and women, doing a lot of things that undermine the personal power and the group power. These things are interrelated. That's what libertarians don't understand. Your group and your posse and the people around you, their strength level is correlated to your strength level. It's a feedback loop of sorts. Everyone understands that you're basically your 5 closest people around you. We influence people. We are influenced by people. And depending on our own character, that's the kind of people that can stand to be around us and that we can stand to be around. So what happens on an individual level does affect us on a social level, and you could start by affecting social reforms that would improve the individual as well. But I don't understand why it's the reason why they don't believe that this is possible is because they've been indoctrinated. And they've been indoctrinated with something that makes them weaker. Libertarianism is the equivalent of veganism or something. It's something that is being promoted by the elite. It is promoted by the elite. It's funded by all the billionaires, right? And they have the nerve. It was funded by the Rothschilds. And they say, well, like, just look at the ideas and engage with the ideas. Same with Christianity, just engage with the idea. Same with communism, just figure, wouldn't it be nice if we shared and we had a society without oppression? Wouldn't it be nice if the lamb lay down with the lion and God sacrificed himself to God with the blood for your sins and all that? Like all this mumbo jumbo. Like, okay, maybe, but why can't we analyze it from a different point of view? Why is it that it's always the same group of people that are promoting these various agendas, and every single one of them, the shared characteristic of every single one of these weird agendas and religions is that it takes away power from me and mine. It tries to tell me that I'm bad, that I'm a sinner, that I have to become spiritually foreign, that I have to adopt a deity of a different people, that some events happen somewhere that I have to care about, that if I don't believe in a historical event, what am I mean, if I don't believe that an event occurred, like someone said that it occurred, then I'm going to go to hell. Like, it's just, like, why are they always trying to take away personal power and community power? Why do I have to get rid of my idols? Like, why do I have to get rid of culture that helps me and mine be strong, cohesive, and to have a power, and to be able to distinguish between enemy and friend? If I adopt Christianity, then I have eliminated one of these distinctions between friends and enemies. It's like my organism, my immune system, my white blood cells now think that a disease is actually normal and part of the body. That weakens me. I now think a Somalian is one of me. He's not one of me. He has his own character, his own characteristic. If I allow him into my society, into my whatever, his innate characteristics will come out, even if he's a nice guy. He can't help himself. We're all partially a product of what we're born into, of our innate characteristics. Why can't I create a theology where our manifested culture and our nation and our race and all that it has theological significance? Why is it all necessarily bad? Well, because the nation of priests told you so, because they don't want you to have a strong identity, because they want you to be diluted, because any conqueror understands that to have rebellions against their rule, you need to have a concert. To have a concerted rebellion, you need to have a concert for the rebellion. You need to have an identity. You have to have cohesion. You have to have all these things. This is objective. This is scientific. There are things that make people like each other more. Blood similarity, similar worldview, just similar power level in general, like competence level, financial level. People like to gravitate towards people who are similar to them. And the key of if you want to talk about, and so anyway, that's the point. That's the whole point of my series. I didn't know how else to explain it. I figured the story would be a good way of telling it. All these ideologies, you have to understand the key point of them is it's about power, right? It's about who gets power. The justification is just that. It's a way of getting there. And the same group of people can, over the centuries, in theory, adopt totally differing ideological projects. But if you look deeper, you will find that it's the same project at the core of it. What's the difference between a worldwide elite of how would the communists have done it if they had won, if they had conquered the whole world using the Soviet Union or China or whatever? Well, they'd have a small council of Soviets ruling over everything, right? According to the ideological dictates of their system. How's that any different than a system of Platonic elites who have instituted a global Sparta? It would be identical, almost identical, right? I mean, it's the same thing. What would have happened if the Christians had won? Well, they would have had their little Vatican. They would have had a collegium of bishops ruling over the world, right? That's what the goal is. It's the synarchy, and to make sure that no rebellion is possible, you have to create an artificial synthetic identity. You have to pit people against one another. I mean, you have to encourage things that make people powerless, right? Guilt, shame, lack of knowledge of the occult, lack of knowledge about history. You have to take away all the things that give people power. You have to destroy their past, destroy their idols, right? Destroy their culture, their cohesion, their friend-enemy distinction, right? Their ability to have pride in who they are, to resist foreigners, right? Because that's who you are as a synarchist, as a foreign priest, xenocrat trying to rule over everybody, right? You want to destroy the barriers to localize, to self-sufficiency on an economic level. That's what's happening for the last however many years, right? You want to destroy the craftsman, say, tradition, right? That's what the Soviet Union did. It made sure everyone was reliant on mass manufactured factory goods, when before a peasant family could make anything that it wanted they were self-sufficient. You want to destroy you want to concentrate power and take away power, and you'll use any means necessary to do that. So ask yourself, does my favorite ideology give me and my people personal power? Does it, make me into a chihuahua, or does it make me into a pack of wolves? Most of you follow chihuahua ideologies, and you think that you're better than me and other people because you're more moral according to the standards of your priest-dictated system. You think that you follow the NAP better, the non-aggression. You're more libertarian than me, so therefore you're better than me. You make more money than me, so you think, not just me, but in general, that's how we do it. That's how a lot of these people feel for themselves. So if you have obviously people with a low character and a low spirit and low IQ, they jump at the chance to basically be mean and nasty and to basically become jailers or to shank their fellow prisoners in this ideological prison that we find ourselves in. I would encourage you to not do that. Just ask yourself, people say, well, with Christianity, belief in God gives me, the strength to, okay, well, but you don't actually need to be a Christian to believe in God, right? Or, with the Russian Orthodox, they'll defend the Russian Orthodox tradition. And it's but you haven't even read the Bible. You don't know anything about Christianity. You've adopted this sort of, your national character has come out, and what you're defending, actually, the only reason why you're defending Orthodoxy to me is because you're Russian and you think it's part of your identity. And it is, partially. It's more a reflection of your identity. There's something more innate that took over and warped Christianity into Russian Orthodoxy and made it more pagan and made it more anti-Christian and made it more localized and nationalist, right? That's what you're clinging on to. That's what you believe that's what you feel is important, and you're right. Same with communism. There's people that cling to the communism in Russia, right? Why do you cling to that? Because there's something, even in America with the civil rights stuff, why do so many conservatives cling to it? Well, because there is something to be said about the Anglo-individualism streak, this whole idea of fair play. I mean, that's how it was sold to people, that these guys just want to play fair. They just want a level playing field. Let's have a fair game and sportsmanship. This appeals to, Northwest Europeans on some very deep level. That's why it was sold that way to them. It was the people who made it this way understood the people that they were deceiving. And now these people who were tricked are actually figuring out that it's actually not about fair play. It's not about a fair chance. It's not about a level playing field. It's actually about putting them down. It's just a simple, racial communism agenda. It's a simple revolutionary, it's Planet of the Apes. That's what it is. That's what's going on here. And they're starting to realize that, and they're like, well, this isn't fair. We signed on to make everything fair and to let people succeed or fail by their own merits. What's this? This isn't what we signed up for. Yeah, no shit. I mean, you got tricked. It's the same thing that happened with, say, communism. How did they appeal to the Russian peasants when they took over with communism? Well, they said it's about the communitarian spirit. It's about standing up to foreign capital. It's about they did all this stuff. They basically said it's about land, peace, and bread. They said it was about land reform. They said it was about sharing the land and taking it away from these absentee landlords and these German nobles or whatever, and letting the peasants have their own land and farm their own thing and work together and have their communes and everything. Cool. I mean, obviously they got tricked. What was Christianity about? It's the same kind of trick. Oh, it's about honoring God. Well, what God? Which God are we talking about? Oh, it's a foreign God. Oh, it's a blood god. It's one that's literally bloodthirsty. Like you have to offer blood sacrifices. That's interesting. In Christianity, that's Judaism. Sorry, but with Christianity coming along, it's the same thing. They took a lot of concepts that appeal inherently to the European peoples. For example, the concept of what you call resurrection is actually anastasis. It's spiritual rebirth. And even the Christian element, like the fact that we became Christian, not fully Jewish, read the New Testament and it's full of European style thinking. It's full of again, this concept of spiritual. They took a lot of European ideas that are just not found anywhere in the Old Testament, which is a very straightforward, just like you give this blood god blood sacrifices and he gives you power and wealth and slaves, right? And then in Christianity, you have, in the New Testament, you have these new, which obviously it's like Gnostic, it's Greek, it's not Jewish. None of this stuff is just anti-material. And you have that's what appeals to a lot of people with Christianity as well. They're like, well, there's obviously some elements here that resonate with me and with the Ethiopian people. Yeah, exactly. I know. That's why you adopt. That's why we were tricked into it. It's the stuff that comes in afterwards. It's the revolution that it rides. It's the people who ride the reforms into power. It's the people who it's the structures that are created to promote these good ideas that you and I both agree about. That's the real crux of it, right? Anyway, I'm going to try and finish that essay series. I've got 12 of them. And what happens is I'm writing something and I will cut the paragraph and I'll move it to another essay because I'm it fits more here. And so every day I'm adding 3 or 4 paragraphs, but they're always being redistributed communist style among the different essays. And so they're all kind of growing in length and structure and coherence bit by bit, but it's slow going. It feels like I'm writing a book. I don't know. All these ideas, it's hard to organize them. I haven't heard anyone else do that. Again, because most of our thinkers are just conservatives. So, what you end up doing is you just end up seeing someone who's well, I really like the 1970s, so I'm just going to defend those ideas, or I really like the 50s, and I'm just going to defend that. Few people really systematically go back to the core of the agenda and then try to explain it. So I can't cheat. I have to actually think it through and use my own words. There's no one I can plagiarize, which, if I could and get away with it, I totally would, but I'm out of luck with this. So anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you liked it. It's been a while since we've chatted. This one's out there for the public. You guys really should start subbing. You really should start becoming paid patrons of the blog. A lot of good content coming out, and I need the support. And frankly, you've been letting me down recently. This doesn't apply to the stalkers who have already supported me. Thank you very much. But to the rest of you, what is your excuse? We're going to have... This is just a lull period now, I would say, with the whole Russia stuff and the Ukraine stuff. We're going to see some real dirty shenanigans coming out in the coming weeks and months. This is an old prediction of mine that we're in the sort of the end games here, and there's secret negotiations and back and forth going on right now, and that it's about to start making itself felt and seen, and they're going to have to justify all of this. So they're going to come out with these new narratives. or we're going to have to debunk them in the coming weeks. But anyway, tune in, subscribe. Seriously, if you haven't done it yet, just do it. I mean, it's $50. Just send me the $50 and bada bing, bada boom. What do you want? I'm running a business here. Anyway, see ya.